you pointed out that, and we talked about how Americans didn't have monarchy, and it was democracy that was a defining feature of American cultural tradition. Uh, unlike the British tradition where you have monarchy and it, informs their way of thinking and cultural and literary production. And uh, this notion of democracy in American Romanticism was emphasized by the transcendentalists. And then we looked at the notion of the question of uh, can we think about Indian Romanticism? This was brought up. And like I'll move on to Emerson. So his essay called Nature, which was published in 1836, was a very influential essay. And it is through that we started looking at his idea of nature and his important ideas. So we came across the fact that he was influenced by Neoplatonism and German idealism. And then we looked at how he had this idea of nature, which comes across through his idea of me and not me. So what is not me is nature, and not me also contains the human body. And his idea of nature, like the romantics, emphasized on the state of childhood. And his idea of nature also uh, considered nature part of God. And then we looked at how he studied German philosophy when he came in contact with Wordsworth and Coleridge. And then we looked at how he points out that love of beauty is a gift of nature, and we there are different gifts that he talks about that nature gives us. So and there was this uh, idea, like there was this trifurcation you talked about, which I couldn't get. You talked about his idea of there was this second state where you talked about man to virtue and fragrant like flower. Like you discussed 3 points. So if you could repeat that after I finish. And then uh, you talked about we talked about how uh, the next gift of nature is language, and all words in language have some correspondence with nature. And the central idea being that language is symbolic of nature. And this invokes the idea of the book of nature that we saw in Coleridge. And then uh, the next idea was nature being symbolic of spirit. And we didn't discuss that, like we just pointed out that fact. And then we moved on to how he says that nature and language have deteriorated throughout history, and the central function of poetry is to revitalize and redeem this bond. And we also discussed how, like the romantics, he emphasized on moving away from cities. And then we talked about his idea of words word world is made up of signs. And that is something that we discussed while we were discussing Augustine. So we see a lot of influence, like that is where you invoke the idea of tradition, and Emerson engaging in the European tradition of knowledge, and drawing upon it, and coming up with his own ideas. And then we and and immediately this was followed by a discussion on his essay called The American Scholar, where he talks about he asser- he presents a vision for the development of American thought, and a search for an uh, independence in the domain of thought for uh, Americans. So he talks about how, like he talks about humanism that is transcendental, and he talks about the and we talked about this idea of man that he presents, which is not bounded up by the notion of labor, and it somehow transcends this diverse sorts of labor that we come up when we are trying to understand this idea of man. Like, I couldn't get this idea of man, and why is he invoking that? He One of the things that you pointed out was that it sort of gives an egalitarian perspective to the idea of man. But my doubt was regarding what do we do with this idea of man. So yeah, that was one of the things that we talked about, and that you this idea of man is a form of humanistic vision that transcends this notion of fragmented individual when you come to the notion of labor division. Yeah, that's where we stopped.
Yeah, very good, very comprehensive, Digvijay. You had two doubts. One was regarding the levels of appreciating nature that Emerson talks about, right? So the first is when you see, say, for example, the flower, right? And that sensory perception and its aesthetic beauty is the primary and the lowermost faculty of appreciating beauty. The second is second level of looking at that flower would be something that may, and that's just a suggestion, that it inspires you to virtue, right? For example, you should spread your fragrance or be innocent like flower or whatever it means. It stirs your ethical self, right? And the third is when that it becomes more of your vision, where you can see order of nature or mind of God that is revealed through this flower, right? So it's almost like a spiritual level, the third level. So these are the three levels of appreciating natural forms according to Emerson. And it very often resonates with the idea of beauty as we discussed in Neoplatonicism, right? Emanating at various levels. That's how. Is that
So
clear?
these are three levels of aesthetic perception.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, I get it. Yeah.
So the first is the physical beauty, the second is the ethical dimension of flower, and fourth is the spiritual dimension, right? Okay, your other question was regarding the use of one man, right? So
Yes,
he
sir.
imagines again like Neoplatonic idea of the one, right, which is transcendent to all diversities. So there is essentially universal human self that he is imagining, right, which is not divided into the capitalist system of division of labor. So a trader or a teacher, right, are divided by their occupations, but they are actually both aspects of the one man. Does that make any sense? And this idea of one man is a spiritual idea here.
Okay, so this is man is in man, not human, right?
Not as male.
Okay.
And in general, that's the gendered nature of English language. Man
Okay.
as insan.
All right, sir.
Right. So not to be confused with gender. I think that was the problem.
No, sir, like what do we like why is he pointing out this, idea of one? Like one of the things is the
Very good.
egalitarian thing, but
Yeah. And he is also critiquing the capitalist division of labor,
okay.
which fragments human self. So it's also a critique of bourgeois industrial bourgeois society, right? So that's why he wants to leave that society and go towards forest, very much like Wordsworth. So just like Kant, while pointing out the limits of reason, is also offering a critique of bourgeois thought. But at the same time, it itself is bourgeois, right? Because he puts reason on the pedestal of giving scientific knowledge on one hand and pointing out the limitations on the other.
Okay.
Right? So romanticism is a modern development. It's a critique of capitalism. Is the point that you have to bear in mind.
Yes. So, sir, Emerson is a contemporary of Marx, right? And people like
Yes,
Engels.
yes.
Okay. All right.
But I'm not sure whether he had any information about it. I'm not very sure.
Yes.
Because Marx,
But the notion of capitalist.
yeah, but he's not mentioning those words. But he's talking about divided human society because of division of labor. Right.
Okay.
Isha is talking about good old bahut purana Plato, where one person should do one task. That was the republic that he had imagined. But yes, it's not the same here, right? One man se uska lena dena nahi hai. Titiksha, not to be confused. Yeah. Okay, so it's a critique of bourgeois society and values, romanticism, right? So even if romantics are talking about nature, you have to get that it's not the same view of nature that they are having, right? And because nature here is not the same as, say, for example, one that you find in Virgil's Aeneid. So you may say that there is description of nature in Kalidas, right? So what is difference between Kalidas' poem called the Meghdutam, which describes the cloud, journey of the cloud as a messenger of love, floating over all the subcontinent, looking at trees and beauty of nature. Now, that nature and the Wordsworthian idea of nature or Emersonian idea of nature is different in the sense that it's used as a critique of the bourgeois, industrialized middle class values, right? It's a critique of contemporary society. That is what you should bear in mind, right? So it's a modern idea compared to, say, for example, Kalidas, right? Who also writes about beauty of nature. For example, Kalidas' great poem, epic called Kumar Sambhav, describes nature in breathtaking way. But this is not a critique of industrialized bourgeois society. Does that make any sense to you, both the points? How we are trying to historicize nature here?
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
Yeah. So American scholar is a kind of which has a scholar who is connected to this idea of one man, right? That means a universal human man, essential human man, not as male, but as the English way of using man without any articles, right? Okay, so another important point that is to be borne in mind, that one of the influences on American scholar is right from the beginning I have been mentioning, is that American agenda in using these ideas was to establish distinctively American tradition of philosophy and art, right? So romanticism in America is part of this nationalist politics to some extent, yeah. So he says, Emerson, that American scholar, right? Not any scholar. He's not talking of British scholar. He's not talking of German scholar. He's talking of the American scholar. And this is at odds somehow with the idea of the one man, right? One man यानी वो पूरी दुनिया का एक मैन होना चाहिए, मगर वो अमेरिकन स्कॉलर के लिए बोल रहा है. So there is some nationalist element and the idea of universal which transcends not only occupation but also nationalities, right? So there is a contradiction in what he is trying to say. Anyway, another influence on American scholar apart from the idea of one man is nature, something that we discussed in the last essay, right? And along with nature, he says the mind of the past. This is the third influence on American scholar. By mind of the past, you basically mean the classical and neoclassical and Christian philosophy, European philosophy, right? All the books of past. For him, these books of past, he calls them mind of the past. And he says that everybody who wrote, say, for example, Plato or Aristotle or Plotinus or anyone, whenever they wrote, they, apart from writing something that is universal, also wrote about something that is specific to that period. So every great author of the past has something which is universal, but at the same time, something that is historically specific, right? And that contingent, that typicality of the age is something that is part of any great book of the past. So you cannot uncritically rely, that's what Emerson is arguing, on any book of the past. You have to sort out, sift out what is something that is useful to us as against something that was typical of that age in which that book was written, right? You should be able to critically separate these two. And that is very important part of American scholarship. And not only that, he goes on to argue that each age must write its own books, right? It cannot simply continue reading the older books, right? So the older books are to be reinterpreted in the light of modernity, right? In the light of modernity by sifting through what is historical to that period in which that book was written, right? Say, for example, you are talking about great book like Shakespeare or say, for example, Homer, right? If you're reading Homer in 2021, then you cannot be uncritically accepting everything. You have to keep in view that many of the things in that book are from that particular period, right? And we are living in a different historical period. So this historical awareness in your reading of the past books is important. At the same time, every period has to write its own books. So books of 14th century are no longer useful in 2021. You have to write books for 2021. And what happens that if we uncritically rely on the books of the past, mind of the past, then the accepted dogmas and prejudices will also enter our thinking. And these books can become, the influence and the impact of this book can become tyrannical. If you look at page 459. So instead of scholar, the man thinking, according to Emerson, will become a bookworm, right? So bookworm is different from American scholar. The American scholar is not a person who just reads and stuffs himself of the books of the past, but looks at them critically, right? Historically. And he says that colleges and institutions are built on the book. And instead of person trying to get knowledge directly from nature will try to rely on the books of the past uncritically, right? And that is the danger in university and college systems, according to Emerson. The last important component of American scholarship is action. And now that is very interesting. Now, he is not talking about scholars, American scholar as somebody who sits in library and pores over the books in past and writes a book that is based on the books in past, but rather a person who knows the different historical contexts in which he or she is operating and writes a new book, right? At the same time, this person is not divorced from actions either, right? It's not the cloistered view of scholarship that Emerson prefers. And you should have the knowledge of life and actions. And though it is secondary for American scholar, action is very important. According to Emerson, he says that without it, he is not yet man. If he doesn't act, he is not yet man, the scholar, right? And without it, thought can never ripen into truth. So in order to make your thoughts ripen into truth, you should connect it with your actions as well. Right, so actions is very important component of scholarship. So you can see he's taking a very different view. He's setting up a different model of American scholar, right? American scholar has eyes on the nature, and by your nature you can even imagine American geography, right? Or American society. Unlike British, he's not talking of nature in Tamil Nadu or nature in Afghanistan or nature in London. He's talking about nature as American environment, right? So American scholar has his eyes on a historical context and a period in which he is situated. He relies on the books in the past, but he does not solely rely on them. He looks at them critically, sifts through what is prejudice of the period and tries to get things which are universal, right? And thirdly, American scholar also is connected to life of actions. He is not somebody who just sits in the library and preach. So you can see there is a very different model which is addressing the need of American nation that is creating this model, right? And finally, very importantly, the American scholar should have self-trust, right? And American scholar is self-directed, self-reliant. Page 460. He is constrained neither by tradition nor religion or nor by fashion and opinion of popular judgment. He seems to stand in relation of virtual hostility to society, right? So he does not allow his own freedom to be undermined, freedom of thought. And you can see how this whole narrative of progress and freedom that we find in Kant, what is enlightenment, or in Hegel's theory of history, right? Progress as reason and emancipation. So reason as emancipating, and remember, if you connect it with Kant's essay here, does anyone remember what we discussed about Kant's what is enlightenment? किसी को याद आ रहा है? Before
thinking for oneself.
Thinking for oneself, exactly. And you can see he's talking of self-reliance in thinking, right? Kant. And trying to create ethics, aesthetics, as well as science or philosophy which is based on rationality rather than authority of reason, or I'm sorry, authority of tradition and authority of religion, right? So Emerson is almost echoing that here. So you can see how deeply is Emerson also influenced by enlightenment here. And you have to understand this this kind of self-trust, self-reliance in the idea of, in the project of constructing distinctive American identity, in the project of constructing a distinctive American intellectual and cultural traditions, right? So basically it means that the American scholar will not set his or her agenda by looking at Europe, right? He will keep his own agenda in mind. So he won't be slavish about the books of the past or of European philosophy. He won't make a slavish imitation of that, but rather will decide what is necessary for American society or for himself or herself, and then decide his or her own research agenda or knowledge agenda, right? So it's, this text is almost American Declaration of Independence in the domain of intelligence, intellect. And he would go on to see how various successive scholars in the world embody the points of view of one universal mind, of the one man that we are talking about. Something that is similar to Hegel's notion of philosophy. He says that philosophy is not an individual endeavor. Remember Hegel? He says that everybody is a collective project. So all the philosophers have contributed to this whole teleology dialectically, even when they opposed something. Right? Plato said something and Aristotle opposed it, but that took knowledge further. Right? So it's a movement. Knowledge is a movement for Hegel. So Emerson is saying all the scholars embody points of view of one universal mind. It's like the spirit of Hegel. So you can see how Emerson is influenced by Kant, Hegel, Fichte, Schelling, Coleridge, and many others. Yeah, here is the quote that I was mentioning in morning. Page number 460. Last paragraph. And Emerson actually praises the whole move. Yeah, influence of Hegel. Hegel, if you, I just recall that Hegel talks about how all scholarship is contributing to the progress of knowledge, right? It's not an individual effort. So just like Plato said something and Aristotle countered it. Now, even while countering Plato, Aristotle is progressing human knowledge, right? So human knowledge or knowledge is a progressive and cumulative phenomenon, according to Hegel. And finally, it will result in the absolute knowledge, the concrete realization of the absolute, which is at the end of the dialectic, when the opposites are sublated, right? And this is similar to Emerson's idea of all scholars giving up, embodying points of view of the universal mind. So there is one mind, and Aristotle would have one point of view, and Plato would have another point of view, and Plotinus would have another point of view. And all these points of view are of single universal mind. And this kind of thinking reveals influence of Hegel. Digvijay, does that clarify?
Yes, sir, it does. Yeah.
Okay. Emerson praises the contemporary tendencies in realism, and we'll be discussing this at length in the next unit. That you praise not just sublime, beautiful, and great, but something that is local, common, low, and contemporary. Literature explores something which is not inherently beautiful, right? But something that is very local, regional, commonplace is something that Emerson welcomes, right? So, in spite of being a romantic, there is a kind of appreciation of realism in Emerson's work. And if you look at this, this is the sentence that I was mentioning to you in the morning. He says, we have listened too long to the courtly muses of Europe. And then he goes on to appeal to young man of America to plant himself indomitably on his instinct and attain perspective of his own infinite life. You have to search for your own self perspective, right? Rather than rely on what people have said in Europe. We will walk on our feet. We will work with our own hands. We will speak our own minds. A nation of men for first time exists because each believes himself being inspired by the divine soul, which also inspires all men. Page 460, last paragraph. Right? It's almost a kind of anti-European, almost decolonize or de-Europeanize America, right? That's a kind of desire for freedom. And do you think in India we have done that, or are we still listening to the courtly music of West in terms of ideas? What do you think? Have we declared independence from Western ideas, or we are still following blindly the ideas from the West? What's your view? Not yet. Why do you think so, Digvijay?
Yeah. Because, sir, it's reflected in our syllabus as well, and that we study, like even in our schools or university systems, and uh, although I do understand that there are points of resistance, and the notion of decolonizing the uh, decolonizing the syllabus, and maybe, what can I use the term, like Indian thought in some sense has uh, taken up, not lately, or maybe like people have been there, who have made interventions, and trying to understand this what this hegemony of Western thought. But yeah, it continues to bear influence, and uh, we do, like, we still study it. Like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but to understand it from a point of view, like you pointed out, in the very beginning, that uh, it is a reflection of uh, hegemony of the Western thought on our syllabus. That the notion of universality, when we come to talk about British tradition or American tradition, it is not in that way that I guess syllabuses are formed. Like, I don't know. You can
Yeah,
shed light.
at least for people, students of English literature, right? We study English literary history for our next set examination, BA syllabus. We study entire knowledge tradition of the West, starting from Plato to Emerson, right? But are we aware of our own literary histories, our own intellectual histories? Are we aware how much do we know about them? What
We
do you
don't.
think? We don't.
Like we
So
haven't studied theories of rasa like we haven't done that yet or
right, or
anything
some,
like it's. Mhm.
or even literary histories, right? Not just that of
Yes.
criticism,
Yeah. Exactly.
right? So Emerson's kind of clarion call, saying that we have heard European muses for too long. Now we will speak our own mind. We will work with our own hands. We will work with on our own feet. Is a kind of American declaration of independence in the domain of mind, right? And I think this was one of the influences on India as well, especially on Gandhi. And Gandhi emphasized the whole business of self-reliance in a very big way. And he said that I will keep all windows of my rooms open, and I will also welcome wind from all the windows, but I refuse to be blown away by any of them. Have you heard of this Gandhi statement? That I will keep all the windows of my home open and let winds from all over the world enter my room, but I refuse to be swept off my feet by any of them. That's a very famous statement by Gandhi. And Gandhi was one of the first important political thinker, right? To say that Swarajya is not just in the domain of politics, but also in the domain of self and knowledge. That's what he wanted, right? Okay, and I think we should also look at influence of transcendentalist on Gandhi. That's another thing. Okay, what is Saloni saying?
No, sir, I was just agreeing to what Diksha said, that it's not just Indian or just Western.
Hmm. And how is it? No, is it Indian enough? Whatever thoughts that you get, or are they all imported?
To say that all are imported or all are Indian would be difficult. When you had asked this question just now, I immediately thought of the new education policy, which talks about imparting education and as far as engineering and such courses go in regional languages.
Hmm.
Now, while it sounds very nationalistic and sort of it upholds the regional languages, gives them like recognizes them, places them on a pedestal of sorts. It's really, if we think about it on the global level, it's I mean, it's really my personal opinion. It doesn't really make that much sense because we are not really to do that on a higher level doesn't really help. So, for instance, right now we talked about our syllabus that we have in literature, which does not really talk about Indian criticism or so just talking about language wouldn't help. It wouldn't transform your thought. Is what I was thinking about.
No, I'm not very. I didn't completely get what you're trying to say. I'm trying to understand.
So I was just saying that it's not all borrowed. It's not all original. It's somewhere in the middle.
So, if it
And
is not all borrowed, then can you point out those aspects of your thinking which are Indian and not from the Europe or
so,
America?
so I think that's where probably culture comes into play, right? because we're located, like you said before, how geography is so important to us. How history and geography cannot be separated. So our collective conscious is not something which is which can be compared, which is comparable with European collective conscious, right? Even if they colonized us.
I am willing to go with you till this extent, but I'm asking you a different question. Are you aware of our own histories and traditions that you claim have shaped our culture? Do you have that knowledge? While you have all the knowledge of Plato and Plotinus and Aquinas and Longinus,
No, sir.
right? So that was what I was asking.
Definitely not, sir.
We are still listening to the muses of Europe. We have not really started listening to the music of muses who are been singing here for past thousands of years.
Yes, sir.
And my argument is not so much coming from nationalism, but common sense. As if, for example, a German अब हेगल फिलोसफी की बात कर रहा है तो वो कांट को पढ़ के बोल रहा है, राइट? जर्मन ट्रेडिशन पे ही इज वर्किंग विद, बट इफ यू आर वर्किंग देन यू विल आल्सो वर्क ऑन हेगल. So common sense says that before searching for water on Mars, you should be searching for water in your own backyard. But we don't know our backyards, right? We don't know the languages and dialects and intellectual traditions in our own backyard, and we are looking at the University of Jena, जहाँ पे हेगल पढ़ा रहा है, right? है ना? So it's not about nationalism, it's just place where you are born. Knowledge has to be relevant to that place, right? Yeah. And that is what is one line summary of Emerson's American Scholar. And it has to be American scholarship. Scholarship cannot, even if you are talking of one man, you are still talking of American scholarship, right? And these are some of the key values that it should embody. That's his argument that he's making. Right? But it's a pertinent question for us, right? We need to think seriously about it. Okay. Anyone has to say something about this? For instance, I wrote a book recently, and it's being worked upon on final stages on critical history of Marathi literature. And I was always thinking that as a student of English, I have studied history of English literature for my NET or SLET, right? And for my living, I teach from Beowulf to Virginia Woolf. And again, for teaching and living, for my salary, I teach from Plato to post-structuralism, say for example, right? So I'm familiar with all these. But am I familiar with history of the language in which I am born? Language of my parents, language in which I grew up, right? So my own research projects are around looking at the backyards rather than taking any nationalistic positions about it. And one of the things that I have seen that, especially due to English medium, it happens that the bilingualism that we are grown up in is a kind of a subtractive bilingualism. More you learn about Western culture, English language, theory, criticism, there is a correlative depletion of your knowledge of your own languages, cultures, and tradition. So you imbibe one language at the cost of another language. So as you internalize English, and many of you must be from English medium, can relate to what I'm saying, because even I'm a victim of that subtractive bilingualism. that my study of English has resulted in me losing out on my own languages. Right? Instead of that, I propose all the time a notion of additive bilingualism. That my study of Hegel should help me to understand my own traditions. At the same time, my own traditions should help me to understand Hegel. There should be a kind of additive bilingualism. It should not result in impoverishment of one language that I am born with. Or two, we are all born with 2 or 3 languages, right, in India, but it results in depletion of these languages. Do you agree with me?
Yes, sir.
Right. So if Emerson was in India, he would have said that there are so many languages in India. So you have to listen to their muses as well. So my research work from past 25 years is listening to the muses in Gujarati and Marathi and Hindi. I also listen to Hindi, Marathi, and Gujarati muses, not just French and German muses, right? Or American muses. Not that I run them down. I love Shakespeare as much as I do. I admire Kant and Hegel, Coleridge and Sir Philip Sidney. Right? So I love those muses, European muses, but then I also listen to the muses near my home. Anything anyone has to say to what I said? And I'm not promoting blind love for your own things. Yeah, you have to be critical about Hindi and Gujarati as well. So I'm not in favor of abandoning critical thinking. Right? I am in favor of engaging with the muses around me critically. So it's not, I'm not a kind of flag bearing nationalism that I'm talking about. Okay. Other essays very quickly that Emerson talked. One is his very famous address, and you will find all this online, right? Address delivered before senior class in Divinity College at Harvard in 1838, where he actually undertakes the critique of existing Christianity in America, right? And he says that the church is in the condition of decay, and it has lost its creative undercurrent, right? And he is also critical of French Revolution belief in reason alone, right? Something similar to Coleridge, who became conservative towards the end of French Revolution, right? So Emerson is critical of both blind religious as well as blind rationalism of French Revolution, Jacobinism. That is very interesting because he says that worship of the goddess of reason ends in madness and murder. Page 461. And then he goes on to talk about Stoic ideas. Stoicism is something that we had discussed, right? And the idea of obey thyself is what he says. And again, you can see this whole, even in terms of religion, he wants to, as if he's talking about an American version of religion, right? So Christianity, as it has come from Britain or Germany, is to be critically rethought. and he proposes certain romantic view of religion. Another of his essay is the Transcendentalist. It's a kind of manifesto of Transcendentalist movement that we are talking about. And all the people like Margaret Fuller, Melville, Whitman, Thoreau are members of American Transcendentalism. Again, he attacks capitalism, right? So he seems to be attacking whatever is established and dead in American society. And he also goes on to criticize the bourgeoisie for materialism, something that he has been doing throughout. And then he says that the idea of transcendentalism is taken from Kant, and it's a form of transcendental idealism that Kant promoted. But there is a great difference, right? While Kant is not so much making a case for spiritualistic view of transcendentalism, he is like Coleridge, Emerson is taking more spiritualistic notion of transcendentalism. And he says transcendentalists are characterized by their withdrawal from society and disinclination even to vote. He is critical of democracy and voting. Right. And transcendentalists have passion for what is great and extraordinary. They stand aloof from contemporary society. And this standing aloof does not mean they are shy or afraid of society, but they want to withdraw from materialism of the society in which he is born, the middle class bourgeoisie. And he continues that kind of criticism of democratic politics in his essay called Politics. And he says that education will result in tyranny of state declining. So what we should be doing is not to have a governance or government, but educate the person where person becomes so self-reliant. Again, an idea of self-reliance, right? That he governs himself. You don't need state to tell you to wear mask. You will wear mask on your own. Which, that's his theory of politics, right? The state will, and he says he is influenced by Aristotle on that matter. Okay, the last essay in 2 or 3 minutes, and I will stop. He is the poet, written in 1844, and he says that universe has 3 children, page 462. One is the knower, the person who gets knowledge. Other is the doer, and the third is a person who says, the sayer. And they, all 3 of them love truth. But poet represents beauty. The poet for Emerson is namer, right? And again, we go back to his theory of language that we discussed. And he goes on to say how poetry is one of the ways by which language is rejuvenated, right? And again, his theory of nature. So language is a symbol of nature. Nature is symbol of spiritual world apart from that. Now, these are the ideas which we are going to be repeating. पूरे सेमेस्टर में आप बोर हो जाओगे ऐसे आइडिया सुन के, क्योंकि सब लोग ऐसे ही बोल रहे हैं. These are the predominant ideas, so we are bound to be repetitive. So what does poet do? He is, by restoring language to nature, is actually reconnecting human beings to nature and the one whole. Something similar to Hegel's absolute. And he says that nature offers a great variety for poet as a picture language, because nature itself is like language. Some another theme that keeps on recurring in Emerson, right? And we also saw that in Coleridge. So you can see influence of Coleridge as well, right? Overwhelming influence of Coleridge on Emerson. And he goes on to make very high claims about poets. 462, last paragraph. They are liberating gods. They are free and they make free. They liberate us from tyranny and fragmentation of conventional perception and from the jail yard of individual relations. They enable us to see ourselves and the world in more comprehensive and far-reaching light. Every thought is a prison, and poet liberates by yielding a new thought. And because we are miserably dying, we require poetry. That's his theory, right, of poetry. Now, what is interesting here, that in some sense he is echoing Shelley. Shelley very famously said that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Right, they are the people who have made the law, but they are not acknowledged as lawmakers. Right, so these are the tall claims that he made, and something similar to Sir Philip Sidney. But what is interesting is that poetry needs to be defended through tall claims, right? Represent certain crisis of art in industrialized bourgeois world. And it's very different from the kind of attack made on poetry by Plato. Is something that we should bear in mind, right? So this is Emerson for you, and this is where we stop for today. Anything anyone has to say before we stop? Tomorrow we'll discuss Edgar Allan Poe and go over to the new unit, second unit. No questions?
Sir, I had one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sir, he's talking about, making tall claims for poetry and poets as liberating gods, and he himself happens to be an essayist. And
No, he was also a poet, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken.
he was also a poet. So, like, is he making these distinctions between poet and a writer who happens to be like, he's writing essays? Like, isn't he himself doing something revolutionary in terms of writing something like the American Scholar or something like the Transcendentalist? And still he's eulogizing the poet as someone liberating. So
Yeah.
this generic distinction and the hierarchy notion comes in. So like,
Yeah.
how does one
Yes,
deal
very
with that?
No, but then you have to make this distinction that he's talking about scholarship as a distinctive discourse as compared to poetic discourse, right? He is making that distinction. That is for sure, right? And poetic universality and the claims, the whole idea of universality has to be understood also in Aristotelian terms, right? So this is pen because this specific object participates in a universal category of pen. Right, that is what Aristotle said. Universal as secondary substance, right? And Wordsworth and Coleridge and Emerson, all three are very happy with Aristotle's views at times, right?
Yes.
And I will just mention one more thing, that in Whitman, and he talks about genius. Emerson says that there is no poet who is genius of America. our fisheries, our Negroes, our Indians, northern trades, southern planting are yet unsung. America is a poem in our eyes, page 463. Its ample geography dazzles the imagination, and it will not wait long for meters. So he says that America has to be sung. So that the task of American poet, right? Now that you brought up American scholar, he's talking of American poet. American poet has to write on American society. He cannot write about something in Britain. वेस्टमिनिस्टर एबे में क्या है उसके ऊपर पोएम यहाँ पे बैठ के नहीं लिख सकते. That's what he's saying, right? And as if responding to Emerson, Walt Whitman brought out his Leaves of Grass, one of the greatest American poems, right? Which celebrates America and in all its diversity. So you can see how he's setting agenda for American scholar as well as American poet, right? And the distinction remains. I don't think he makes a hierarchy between them, but he does make a distinction. If that was your question.
Sir, but he's only talking about poetry, right? He's no talk about prose or anything like it is.
I would
poet.
say, I would look at word poet in its classical sense of kavi, right? As a maker, poesia, right? Or as weights, as Romans used to say, the prophet, right? So it would include literary prose as well.
Yes, yeah, that was my question. Like,
yeah. You would include novels like Nathaniel Hawthorne or Melville were the great poets of prose, right? And even Whitman's poetry is prosaic. He is not using meters and rhymes of Great Britain. अंग्रेजी rhyme को छोड़ के कविता लिख रहा है. He is abandoning rhyme scheme and meters, right? It's American Declaration of Independence in terms of prosody as well.
yes,
Right.
sir.
So poet in a very broad sense of the word. Okay, so let us stop for today. We'll carry on this discussion tomorrow, right? By looking at his contemporary, younger contemporary, Edgar Allan Poe. And those who are interested in watching films, there is a film called The Raven, which is based on Edgar Allan Poe's fictionalized life, which is a very interesting film. Okay, so we are stopping for today.